It's only been a few minutes since 11 of Canada's provincial and territorial premiers left a meeting at the White House. They have been in Washington this week in an attempt to quell President Donald Trump's incoming tariffs. British Columbia Premier David Eby spoke with reporters as Team Canada left the White House.
I think the dominant impression is that it was a very significant day at the White House, and yet they still sent two senior reps to meet with us. It was a good conversation. I thought it was constructive. There were some very frank moments across the table, and they urged us to take the president at his word, and so we will certainly do that.
Premier of Yukon Ranj Pillai was part of the diplomatic operation in Washington, and he joins us now. Premier, thank you so much for making the time on such a busy and I'm sure remarkable day for you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so one of the folks that you were meeting with, James Blair, has tweeted about the meeting, and I'm just going to read this now. He said, "Pleasant meeting with the premiers. To be clear, we never agreed that Canada would not be the 51st state. We only agreed to share Premier Eby's comments. Further, we said the best way to understand President Trump's position is to take what he says at face value." And then he adds Sergio Gore, who was, I believe, the other official that was part of this meeting. Obviously, I want to get to your take on the meeting in the moment, but you know, it's that sentence, "we never agreed that Canada would not be the 51st state," that I think sort of sends a chill down a lot of Canadian spines. What does it tell you when you see senior people in the administration who aren't politicians but staff repeating these kinds of comments like that?
Yeah, look, my takeaway was first, our position, I guess I would say, is, look, there's no Canada becoming the 51st state, and President Trump's not going to own Canada, but he also certainly doesn't want to own inflation, and we know that tariffs will lead to that. And the discussion today, it was frank, and I think it gave me a clearer line of sight on what this administration, their posture is, what their resolve is on where they want to be. They want to flip government on its head compared to where the administrations of the past have been. That means they will do extraordinary things to position themselves. And I think that is resetting relationships globally. We have to be open to that. But also, you're dealing with somebody who's a deal maker and somebody who is always open to a negotiation. So you have to be swift in preparing for that. We know we're up against some significant timelines. So what I take away from this is we have a lot of work to do, both at the territorial and provincial level, to understand what we can put on the table. As I've said, if you're essentially sitting down and you're trying to cut the pie up differently with this president, he's going to want the biggest piece, if not all the pieces. So you better figure out what the next pie looks like that you're going to put on the table. And there's some things that we know we can do as a country, new areas of the economies that can grow. Focus on defense. These are things that are going to be very key. So, their focus, though, again, is to really reset how everything works. And people have to be open to that. It's not just about the relationship with Canada. It's the relationship with everybody. And you could tell that in the meeting.
I appreciate that you have to use some discretion in what are ultimately private meetings, but I'm just really trying to understand what is at the core of what you're saying about how he wants to reset the relationship with everybody. What is the most important thing that was said to you or communicated to you with regards to Canada and this desire for reset?
Yeah, look, I will take from my experience in the meeting, but also from what I've learned sitting with lawmakers over the last day, last night as well, business leaders across the U.S. There's an aspiration by many Americans that this government will do something with a dramatic change to how governance is done, and that means people want to feel like America's winning. They want to feel that this president is going to lead that charge, and he wants to fulfill that, and that's how he operates. So. It's a difficult, tough table to be at for all of us, but we're in a very favorable position. I mean, Canada has an incredible wealth of resources. We have always, had that incredibly important relationship, but this is, nothing to take lightly. We have to be in a position collectively to not waste any moments, This is not something where, we can wait for a couple of weeks and get proposals ready. We have a moment in time. The Commerce Secretary has not been put into position. So, of course, Canadians are watching, hoping that we would have some maybe significant news from us and the federal government. But look, the people that are going to be negotiating aren't even in place yet. So, on a very busy day, we had an opportunity to meet with some key people.
Let me ask you, you say we have a lot of work to do. We need to think about what we can put on the table, and there's not a lot of time to draw things up. If I think about what Canada has already put on the table, $1.3 billion border strategy, there was an additional $200 million, so $1.5 billion that Canada has pledged just on the border. Speeding up NATO defense spending timelines. I mean, we're talking about something that was supposed to take 8 years now. Apparently, we might be able to do it in 2. I guess I just wonder, are you saying like we've got to start flipping over the couch cushions and going through our pockets and figuring out like where else can we draw what are pretty significant sums of money and effort that the country's going to have to pull a lot more of that out in very short order to appease Trump?
No, look, I think the border is a significant and real concern here. And I think the moves that have been made by both premiers and the federal government is meeting the mark. That's my sense. We're doing good work and there's much to do. We know we're going to the trade table, but look, we have to think in a different way. Critical minerals, you've heard this from everybody around this discussion. We know that most of the processing and the value add happens in other places in the world. Yet 85% of this is controlled by, unfriendly nations. But yet we have, all the critical minerals that you could ask for in our country, and the U.S. has a thirst to have an industrial base grow again. So, why are we not looking at making sure that we secure both countries, secure supply chain? Many provinces and territories have something to contribute. This is going to create, through the processing facilities that are required, many jobs in red states in the U.S., good jobs. It's going to bring back American jobs, but also is going to grow Canada's economy. We have, mining CEOs with us last night. They see this incredible opportunity for our country. So, I'll leave the energy producers and electricity producers, those leaders and those premiers to put their ideas on the table. But really, it's coming to the table to say, how do we create thousands of more jobs and more of a stronger economy between both of our countries? And I think that's the way we have to think. It's not, so much about coming up with more dollars from Canada, but how do we create dollars in both Canada and the U.S.? And I think that's the type of thinking we have to be positioning ourselves around.
So that makes me think of those comments from the Prime Minister just last week at the Canada-U.S. Business Summit that were supposed to be somewhat private and, of course, have now become public, where he was telling this group of business leaders and labor leaders, Trump wants our critical minerals and he thinks the easiest way to get them is absorbing Canada. This is a real thing. Do you share that view?
No, I mean, because I've been around that industry for so long, it's not how it works. I mean, it's capital that comes from markets. It's private companies, that hopefully have built strong relationships with, in our country, Indigenous governments, with First Nation governments in the Yukon, and Indigenous governments across the country. And then, they usually have offtake agreements so they can take that concentrate and put it through processing. Most of it goes offshore. It should come back to Canada and the U.S. So, he may want critical minerals, but the way to do that, really, in the current construct of how we do business and the ecosystem around critical minerals globally, is to have great companies that are Canadian and U.S. companies do that work and contribute to our communities and do it in a good way. So, I don't get caught up in those comments when he says that, because, it's just not how, we do business in those sectors. So I think really for us, I don't get caught up in the 51st state piece, because we know no Canadians are going to put up with that. That's not even a starting point for any of us. People can say it. I think but what I look at clearly now is how are we going to negotiate? What are we putting on the table? We know some of those first things that were identified as priorities, like the border. We have a huge fentanyl problem in our own communities across the country. We need to look in the mirror and say, we should have been doing this before. So let's take care of our people in both countries. That's a smart thing to do. But at the same time, collectively working with the federal government, because of course they're the lead on this.
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind enough to make time for us today, but we all have to be working on the next number of proposals that can come forward.
Premier, we are right out of time, but I just want to be clear about this as we end. It sounds like you are saying, despite all the concern right now, that you believe if we do the right things, there is a path out of this where Canada can avoid tariffs. Should that be the takeaway from the meeting today?
Yeah, when somebody like Trump, who loves to negotiate, there's always an opportunity. I think I have felt since early December that we were probably going to deal with some economic pressure. I still feel that there's something there, but how do we minimize that? And we see things happening around the world. This government yesterday, the King of Jordan's here. We saw what happened with Putin today. I mean, it's nonstop. We need to focus on some quick wins for our country, and then let President Trump move on to the many other things that are on his list of priorities as he moves into, hopefully week 4 or week 5 of his presidency.
It was, I'm sure, one of the more fascinating days. You've had an important day for Canada. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about it, Premier.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yukon Premier Ranj Pillai.